I've been using Expo UI since the alpha days, and now with the beta in Expo SDK 55, it's come a long way. But there are still a few things that aren't obvious. And if you don't know them, your app just won't feel polished. I've been building production applications with Expo UI, and today I'm sharing 6 tips that will save you hours of debugging and make your application feel way more native. Oh, and before we get into it, this video is sponsored by TestSprite. If you haven't heard of TestSprite yet, it's an AI-powered testing agent that automates your entire software testing workflow, from generating and executing tests to diagnosing issues for both front-end and back-end parts of your project. So you don't have to write and maintain tests manually. They just released TestSprite 2.1 with some great new upgrades like visual test modification, where you can click on a snapshot of a test step and tweak it without writing selectors by hand, and GitHub integration, so your tests run automatically on every pull request. Also, there's an online TestSprite hackathon starting March 9th that runs for a whole week with prizes up to grabs. You can build something real, use TestSprite to generate tests, and submit your project. All the details and the hackathon links are in the description below. And honestly, them sponsoring this video helps me keep making content like this for you. So if you're curious about TestSprite or want to join the hackathon, go check it out. Make sure to use my link. And now let's get into it. Alright, let's dive straight into the tips. I'm gonna be using my AI tattoo application Codebase. It's using a bunch of Expo UI, so it's a great example. And then Platano, which is a new template that I'm working on to create basically nano banana wrappers super fast. And it's also using Expo UI for iOS and Android. The first tip that I want to share is the safe area that by default comes with Expo UI components. Let's navigate to the playground. Let's say that I want to try on this tattoo. So let's press use tattoo. It's kind of like breaking the UI. The space between the keyboard and the input is very big. So if UI, it's gonna try to move things so that they are not covered by the keyboard. So in this case, I had my input and I'm using a sticky view, by the way, from React Native Keyboard Handler. And this is position absolute. Everything looks correct. These measurements are correct. But somehow when I open my input, it's still taking more space that I would like to. This is why you need to be aware of ignoreSafeArea property that comes in the host component. This view controls the safe area regions the SwiftUI hosting view should ignore, because sometimes you want to have this functionality, but sometimes you don't. So you can ignore all the safe areas or just the keyboard. So if I tell this view that it should ignore the keyboard, then just like that, it fixes it. So this is actually pretty painful if you are not familiar about this ignoreSafeArea property. And yeah, just like that, it's fixed. It's basically ignoring, and it's not going to try to avoid the keyboard by default. Here's another example on my AI tattoo application. I'm using, in this case, ignoreSafeArea all. And this is the button that you can see at the bottom right of the image. If I don't use this ignoreSafeArea all, look what happens when I open and close the keyboard. The view is somehow trying to avoid the keyboard, and it's actually not working, but the button is still moving a little bit. So to prevent that, you can just ignore all the safe areas in this case, because I don't care about the button being covered in this case, because the user can always swipe down to dismiss the keyboard. All right, the second tip, the property matchContents. So matchContents, what it's doing, it's basically automatically giving a width and height to the SwiftUI view, so that it can actually be rendered correctly on your component. So right now I deleted the matchContents property in this host view, which is the input controls. And just like that, I broke it. Even if I do flex of 1 and provide a border width of 1, just in color red, just to see where it's at, you can see that we are actually not providing enough space. And you can think of the host as a window for me to access the SwiftUI view. So here's my inputs. And in order for the input to be accessible to the user, you need to create a host view to render it. But right now, my host view is only like this size. So we need to give it a width and height. What you can do instead of using flex of 1, it's, give it a width of 100%, but this actually, I don't think it's gonna work, because you have to actually provide a number. So if I give it a height of 40, and I think we can delete the height, the width there. Now this is accessible, as you can see here. But how do I know the height of my content that I have down here, which is the input, right? I would need to somehow try to match it perfectly, because I said 40 right now, but it would be 30, and now the window is smaller than the actual size of the native view. We could actually not register some presses, like right there I'm pressing just outside the window. So the way to fix this, it's actually very easy. Just delete the entire style and pass the match contents, which is gonna give it the exact size it needs. So right now I would need to refresh my screen, and let's try it again. And right now it's just gonna work. No matter where I press, it's going to register my touches. So what that is doing is basically just adding the host width and height to match exactly the width and height of the inner SwiftUI view. And this is the host view, by the way. This is way cleaner. This is what is happening. Tip number 3, it's about React Native host view. This is actually a component that you can use from Expo UI, and it allows you to host a React Native view within an Expo UI view. All right, let me explain how this works. React Native by default uses UI kits, but when we are trying to use Swift UI, the way we instantiate these views is using the host view, right? So we can create a host view and add native components from Swift UI and Jetpack Compose. But the thing is that when we are adding these buttons inside this host view only allows native components from Expo UI. So if you try to use a UI kit view here, this is actually gonna break your application. So in order to have a normal view from React Native, we need to create a host view, right? This is my host view, and this will allow me to use my normal views from React Native inside this. Technically, we are inside a Swift UI view or Jetpack Compose view, but we can still use React Native primitives. So let me show you this in action. So for Platano, we want to provide a fully native settings screen for iOS and Android. So this entire settings screen, it's a single host view. So I'm just writing Swift UI here. And for Android, what we're doing, it's the same thing. It's a host, but all the components are coming from, Jetpack Compose, right? So these are fully native screens. Now, the thing is that I wanted to showcase this preview of how the UI is going to look depending on the settings that the user is selecting here. So it could be the roundness and all that. So for that, I wanted to use a view from React Native. And here you can see it. This is an RN host view that is coming from Expo UI Swift UI. And since this entire view is Swift UI in this case, I cannot use directly views from React Native, which is what I'm doing here. This is coming from React Native. Super simple, just host a React Native view inside your Swift UI view, and then you can use React Native stuff. Very important component to be aware of when using Expo UI, for sure. Tip number 4, use platform extensions for components or routes. Now, platform extensions is a concept that is actually not tied to Expo UI, but it's very important when working with Expo UI because you are either using Swift UI or Jetpack Compose to render components. So if you implement this naively, you're gonna break your application for other platforms when you are using, specific things for a platform. So what I recommend here is always to create a platform extension when you are using Swift UI or Jetpack Compose. So in this example, the input controls, this is coming from Platano, by the way. I navigate to the screen. These input controls, if you notice here, this is my default component. It doesn't have a platform extension. This is because you actually need to have a normal named component, but for other fallbacks, you can add the platform. So in this case, this is for Android, but you could be iOS as well. And for each platform extension, you're gonna need to implement the fallback that you want to use. So in this case, for the inputs, I wanted to use Liquid Glass, I wanted to use Swift UI. So I can go ahead and import all the modifiers and all the components that I want to use in this component, and it's gonna be okay. It's not gonna break Android because Android is gonna use this component just by creating this platform extension. When you compile your application, this is gonna be loaded for Android. And at the moment, I'm just using normal views from React Native, but I'm planning to implement Jetpack Compose in the following days. You can use .android, .native for iOS and Android, .web, .ios. But remember that you always need to have at least one normal name, like input controls, like in this case. Tip number 5 is going to be centralize your API. So when working with Expo UI, you need to avoid duplicating code and logic on each screen, because a naive solution here, for example, I'm inside iOS implementation. A naive solution here would be to do my fetch request, to do my state update, and all the things that doesn't have to do with Expo UI. It would be naive to do it here because I would need to reutilize the same logic on my Android implementation, right? I need to also handle this. So it's a good idea to abstract, starting from the types, all the things that these two views are gonna use, and then the actual logic. The way you do that is by lifting the state. And by lifting the state, I mean creating a context, for example. So in this case, let's take the spacing, for example. This is coming from this context, and it's being used in both native views, but I don't need to implement it again because it's coming from the context, right? So the spacing, if I go to the Android implementation, you can see that I'm also accessing the spacing, and it's the same API I'm reusing as much as possible. That's the goal. So what I recommend when working with Expo UI and doing this kind of abstractions is to think of them as a mini package or mini library that you are creating, and you need to ensure reusability and compatibility. All right, tip number 6 is going to be to use platform colors. So in case you didn't know, Expo Router in the latest version of Expo SDK 55 now comes with a utility color that you can use to graph the platform colors of each platform, colors for Android and iOS. And the way you access them is just by saying color.ios.systemBackground. And then for Android, you can actually use dynamic surface colors and material colors, which is really cool. So you can access it by saying color.android.dynamic.surfaceContainer. But honestly, my favorite part of using native colors is Android, because Android takes the colors and all the color palette for the entire theme from the wallpaper. So if I go back, let's close that. Let's change my wallpaper. So if you notice, every time that I press one of these colors, the entire UI, system UI changes, right? So let's use this kind of like purple. And now my system theme, it's like purple, right? So if I go out and navigate across my application, everything it's like with this color scheme. So when I go to my app, now my app is going to adapt to the platform colors. In my opinion, this is absolutely amazing, and it's also compatible with light and dark mode automatically, so you don't have to worry about anything else. One other thing that I wanted to mention, especially for Jetpack Compose, let me show you the settings screen. So for Jetpack Compose, I'm using all these components, but let's grab a button as example. You can pass modifiers, and on the modifier, you can pass a background from Jetpack Compose, and in here you can pass native colors directly, and you can take them from Expo Router. So I can say color android.system surface, or what's the name, dynamic.surface, yeah. And that is going to take the color from the background and the system. These are the small things that make a massive difference when working with Expo UI, from handling the keyboard properly by ignoring the safe area, to using matchContents correctly, to bring in React Native views using the React Native host view inside Expo UI views. Add platform-specific extensions, centralize your API logic instead of duplicating it everywhere, and use native platform colors. Most of these aren't obvious when you first start with Expo UI, but once you know them, everything just clicks. If you are serious about building polished React Native and Expo apps, or maybe you're interested in the Platano template that is shipping soon, which will allow you to ship your own application production ready, it's gonna be massive. Check out the links in the description. Also, thanks to TestRite for sponsoring this video. Make sure to check them out. The link is in the description as well. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you in the next one.